ॐ सहनाववतु सहनो भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं कर्वावहै तेजस्विनावदितमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। Om, may He protect us both, teacher and students together. May He nourish us both together. May we work conjointly with the great energy. May our study be vigorous and effective. May we not mutually dispute, or may we not hate any. Om, let there be peace in me, let there be peace in my environment, and let there be peace in the forces that act on me. Dear students, today we are going to start discussion on injuries around elbow joint, which includes supracondylar fracture of the humerus and posterior dislocation of the elbow mainly. However, today we will be focusing only on the supracondylar fracture of the humerus in children. And this particular topic we will be discussing under various headings, and these headings or the points include the applied anatomy of the elbow joint, various types of injuries around the elbow, then classification of elbow injuries, classification of distal humerus fracture in children, then mechanism of supracondylar fractures, predisposing factors for the pediatric supracondylar fractures, the incidences and statistics, classification of supracondylar fracture humerus, Gartland's classification for the pediatric extension type of supracondylar fracture, and the clinical features, investigations including radiography, various radiographic features, management, conservative versus surgical, complications, and finally the cubitus varus deformity in brief. So coming to the applied anatomy of elbow. You all know that elbow joint is the most notorious joint in the body, for it is associated with many complications following injury or trauma to the elbow. It easily becomes stiff, and it offers stiff resistance to the efforts of the treating doctor to make it mobile again. Elbow joint is a compound paracondylar joint, as the lower end of the humerus articulates with both radius and ulna. However, it is a hinge joint allowing only flexion and extension through an arc of 150 degree. And to be more specific, the humero-ulnar component is a modified sellar joint. The humero-radial component is an unmodified ovoid joint, and the proximal radioulnar joint is a modified ovoid joint. All the three components mentioned so far, they share the same joint capsule, and this particular point makes it respond differently to the trauma, exercises and massage. Now it has a capsule which is reinforced laterally by the radial collateral ligament and medially by the ulnar collateral ligament. The annular ligament holds the head of radius in its position. So three important ligaments: the radial collateral, the ulnar collateral and the annular ligament. Now it flexes mainly due to the action of biceps and brachialis, supported by brachioradialis, pronator teres and common flexus. It extends due to the action of triceps and aided by anconeus and common extensors. Now biceps and supinator, they cause supination, and pronator teres and pronator quadratus, they help in pronation. Three important nerves of the upper limb pass around the elbow. The radial nerve crosses laterally, the ulnar nerve passes beneath the medial epicondyle and enters the forearm through the two heads of flexor carpi ulnaris, and the median nerve crosses in front. Now, do you know what is patella cubitis? These are the accessory bones present in the triceps near its attachment at the olecranon. So what is vital fact? The important elbow flexor is the brachialis, and it is called the workhorse of the elbow flexor. Whereas the primary elbow extensor is the triceps. This we have to remember. Now, let us know something about the secondary ossification centers in the elbow. Now, importance of knowing these secondary ossification center is that they are often mistaken as fractures in children. Mnemonics CRMTOL. It helps to remember the age at which the secondary centers of ossification around the elbow develop. And remember, all these are in the multiple of 2. So CRM, C stands for capitellum. Here the ossification center appears at 2 years. It may be from 6 months to 2 years. R, radial head, 4 years. M, medial epicondyle, 6 years. T, trochlea, 8 years. O, olecranon, 10 years. It may be from 8 to 10 years. And L, the lateral epicondyle, 12 years. The other way to remember is the internal epicondyle appears at 6 years, trochlea appears at 9 years, and external epicondyle at 12 years. 6, 9, 12. ITE. If you look at the posterior elbow geometry, so what we get is a triangle sign. The relation between the 3 bony points around the elbow, namely the lateral epicondyle, the medial epicondyle, and the olecranon, is important to differentiate between the fractures around elbow and dislocations. In flexion, these 3 bony points almost form equilateral triangle. It is not equilateral, it forms almost equilateral. Now this is maintained in supracondylar fractures, and it is disturbed, this equilateral triangle is disturbed in the posterior dislocation of elbow. Now in extension, these 3 bony points, they will lie in a same straight line. You can see the second B picture. Now in the posterior dislocation of elbow, the olecranon process of ulna, it lies above the line joining the medial and lateral epicondyle. Now coming to the carrying angle. Now this varies with the elbow flexion and extension. In full flexion, the carrying angle is 0. In full extension of the elbow, the long axis of the arm and the long axis of the forearm do not lie in the same straight line. The latter forms a valgus angle of 11 degrees with the former. Now this is slightly more in females, and it is called as a carrying angle in extension. Now the carrying angle helps the elbow to clear the pelvis. Increase in this particular angle results in cubitus valgus deformity, and decrease in the angle forms the cubitus varus deformity. However, the carrying angle disappears with full flexion of the elbow, and it is in this position that the long axis of the forearm and long axis of the arm, they lie parallel to each other. Coming to the injuries around the elbow, fall on the outstretched hand is the more common in children because they are more playful and hence more prone to fall. And thus the upper extremity are vulnerable to fractures. 65 to 75% of all the fractures sustained by children, they are seen in the upper limb. If you look at the incidence of injury around the elbow, so what we find is the supracondylar fractures are almost 65.4%. Condylar fractures accounts for 25.3%. Fracture neck of the radius 4.7%. Monteggia fractures 2.2%, olecranon fractures 1.6%, and T condylar fractures 0.8%. However, if you see about all the bony injuries in the children, fracture of both bone forearm, it ranks first, followed by fractures around the elbow. And if we look at the incidence of pediatric fractures in the distal humerus, what we find is supracondylar fractures account for 69%. Lateral condylar fractures account for 16.8%. Medial condylar fractures for the 14.1%. And T condylar fractures only 1%. Coming to the classification of fractures of the distal humerus in children. The fracture of distal humerus in children are grouped mainly under three groups. Group A, Group B, Group C. Group A consists of supracondylar fractures, which can again be subdivided into extension type and flexion type. Group B consists of physeal fractures, where the lateral condylar physis may be there, or a medial condylar physis may be there, or total distal physis may be involved, or it could be a medial and lateral epicondylar physis. And type C, it contains the T condylar fractures. Now let us start with today's important topic, that is the supracondylar fracture of the humerus in children. Now, as mentioned earlier, supracondylar fracture of the humerus is very common in children. The reason lies in the bony architecture of the supracondylar area in the children. Now, the mechanism of injury and the predisposing factors exploit this particular potential weakness in this area and break it more often than any other bone in the children. The supracondylar fracture of the humerus is also called as Malgagnis fractures. Do you know this? Now, the question is, why supracondylar fracture of humerus is common in children less than 10 years? The answer is, the bony architecture at the supracondylar region is weak and vulnerable because in this region, 1. Bone is remodeling, 2. It is less cylindrical, 3. Metaphysis is just distal to two foci, coronoid and radial, 4. Here the cortex is very thin, 5. The anterior cortex has a defect in the area of coronoid fossa. All these 5 factors make it weak and easily breakable with the bending force. And moreover, the laxity of anterior ligament permits the hyperextension at the elbow. Now, the process of juvenile supracondylar fracture goes as follows. 1. The ligamentous laxity at the elbow leads to hyperextension. And hyperextension then converts the linear force into the bending force. This olecranon concentrates this bending force to the weak supracondylar area. The anterior capsule becomes taut, and then the bending force results into the supracondylar fracture. Now, the mechanism of injury is usually fall on an outstretched hand. Now you look at those pictures, how the children play in the playground. So the fall on an outstretched hand with the hyperextension at the elbow and adduction or abduction with hand dorsiflex is the commonest mechanism of supracondylar fractures of humerus in children. Let us have a quick review of the statistics. If you look at the age, it is usually the first decade. Mostly the patients are belonging to 5 to 8 years of age group. 84% of the cases are less than 10 years of age. If you look at the sex, the boys have more incidence of supracondylar fractures, 63.6%. If you look at the sides, then it is the left side more commonly involved, 58%, as compared to right side, 42%. The incidence of open fracture is only 2.3%. The nerve injury incidence is 7%, and out of all the nerve injuries, 45% of the time it is the radial nerve which is involved, 32% of the time it is the median nerve which is involved, and 23% of the time it is the ulnar nerve which is involved. Incidence of Volkmann's ischemic contracture is only 0.5%. The fracture of ipsilateral extremity may be seen in 1.2% of the cases. And if we look at the type of the fracture, supracondylar fracture, so flexion type, it is only 2.3% of the time, whereas extension type supracondylar fracture, the incidence is 97.7%. Now coming to the classification. The supracondylar fracture is broadly classified into, as I already told you, extension type and flexion type. In the extension type, if you see in the first picture above, the fracture line runs upwards and backwards, whereas in the flexion type it runs downwards and backwards. Extension type of the supracondylar fracture is further classified into the following subtypes as described by Gartland. Now Gartland has classified the supracondylar extension type fracture further into 3 subtypes. Type 1, you see in the picture, it is an undisplaced supracondylar fracture. Type 2, it is displaced, but as you can see in the second picture, the posterior cortex is intact. And type 3, it is displaced, but there is no intact posterior cortex. And the distal fragment could be displaced either posterior-medially or posterior-laterally. Coming to the clinical features, the patient complains of pain and swelling, which is a gross S-shaped deformity of the upper arm is obvious. You can see in the first and second picture. And there is a loss of both active and passive movement of the elbow. Now symptoms relating to the muscular and the nerve injuries may be seen. The patient may also complain of pseudo-paralysis. The test should be carried out for the brachial artery and all the 3 nerves of the upper limbs, namely the radial nerve, the median nerve and the ulnar nerve. Now this can be done very easily by asking patient to make a fist and open it up. If he or she can do it, then all nerves are intact. Palpate the radial pulse, if it is palpable, well felt, the brachial artery is okay. Now the following are the characteristic clinical signs of supracondylar fractures. One is the arm is short, forearm length is normal. There is a gross swelling and tenderness around the elbow joint. Crepitus is present, but it should not be elicited for the fear of increasing pain and damaging the neighboring neurovascular structures. And of course, the S-shaped deformity. You can see here, it is shown by the red arrow. Then another is a dimple sign due to one of the spikes of proximal fragment penetrating the muscle and tethering the skin. So anteriorly you can find that dimple sign. The relationship between the 3 bony points is maintained. Soft spot. It is also indicated by the red arrow should. The soft spot is an effusion beneath the anconeus muscle. Movement of the elbow, both active and passive, are of course decreased. Now coming to the radiograph, once you have clinically diagnosed it to be a case of supracondylar fracture humerus, you need to confirm by taking radiographs. A proper study of radiological sign in both AP and lateral view of the elbow is extremely important, not only to study the fracture anatomy, but also to check for the adequacy and accuracy of reduction, a failure of which will result in malunion later. Now in AP view, main important what we see is the Bowman's angle. The Bowman's angle is an angle between a horizontal line of the elbow and the line drawn through the lateral epiphysis. You can see here the horizontal line and a line drawn along the epiphysis, lateral epiphysis, and the long axis of the normal. Now normally this particular angle, it is less than 5 degrees. Some people call this angle as a Bowman's angle. So that will be 85 degree, but normally this is what we call as a Bowman's angle, and it is less than 5 degree, and it should always be compared with the other side. Now the angle between the long axis of the humerus, now this is the long axis of the humerus, and the transverse axis of the elbow is normally 90 degree. Now if this angle is less than 90 degree, it suggests the cubitus varus, and the angle greater than 90 degrees suggests the cubitus valgus. Now in lateral view, we look for the teardrop sign. Now look here, this is a line diagram drawn. This is what we call as a teardrop. Now in this normal X-ray, this particular thing you can see as a dropper, and a drop is coming out. Now it is disturbed in supracondylar fracture, but it is seen in the normal radiograph. Now in lateral view, normally there is an angulation of 40 degree. Now you look here, the alignment of the lateral epiphysis and the vertical axis. This angle is 40 degrees here. So there is an angulation of 40 degree between the long axis of the humerus and long axis of the lateral epicondyle. There is another line described, what we call as a anterior humeral line. This is what is anterior humeral line. Now a line drawn along the anterior border of the distal humerus of the shaft passes through the middle 1/3 of the capitulum, as you can see in the third X-ray. And if it is passes anterior to 1/3, as you can see in the fourth diagram, it indicates the posterior displacement of the distal fragment. Here you see it is passing in the anterior 1/3. It is passing here in the middle 1/3. So here it is the posterior displacement of the distal fragment, we can say. Then coming to another line, what we call as a coronoid line. Now coronoid line, a line directed proximally along the anterior border of, you see the anterior border of the coronoid process of the ulna, it should touch barely the anterior portion of the lateral condyle. Now the posterior displacement of the lateral condyle will project the ossification center posterior to this particular line. Now the olecranon fossa is deep, and thus the fat pad here lies totally contained within the fossa. Not seen in the normal lateral radiographs. As you see here, you cannot see any of the fossa shadow here. But if you see here, now you can see the fossa. So distension of the capsule with the effusion due to the trauma or infection causes the olecranon pad to be visualized as a radiolucent gap. Now you can see here the radiolucent gap. Here you cannot see because there is no injury here, but you can certainly see. So that is what is known as a fat pad sign. Now due to rotation of the distal fragment, you can see the distal fragment is rotated here. This is a distal fragment, it is rotated. The anterior border of the proximal fragment, it looks like a sharp spike, isn't it? This is a sharp spike. So that is what we call as a fishtail sign. Coming to the crescent sign. Now here normally the radiolucent gap appears. Should you hear the radiolucent gap? Can you see the radiolucent gap here? Of the elbow joint. In case of the fractures, it is missing, and now you can see a crescent here. Can you see? The crescent shaped shadow due to the overlap of capitulum over the olecranon is evident, and it indicates either the varus or valgus tilt of the distal fragment. Then coming to the quick facts of the radiological points, the posterior displacement of distal fragment is indicated by 1. Loss of teardrop sign, 2. Coronoid line, 3. Fat pad sign, and 4. The anterior humeral line. The coronal tilt of the distal fragment, which is usually varus but it could be valgus sometimes, is indicated in radiographs using either the crescent sign or the Bowman's angle. And then the horizontal rotation of the distal fragment is indicated by the fishtail sign. This is what is the fishtail sign. Coming to the management part. Most of the cases, must be initially managed conservatively. Now, initially the close reduction is tried under general anesthesia by traction and counter traction method, as shown in this particular diagram. You can see the traction, the counter traction, and the traction. Now, first, once you have, after applying the traction against counter traction, once the fragments are disimpacted, first the medial and lateral tilt is corrected first, and then the posterior displacement at the last. Now, an immediate check can be made whether the reduction has been successful or not by noting the long axis of the forearm and the arm, which should be parallel, because now once you reduce it, the posterior displacement, then you have to flex completely the elbow. And in complete flexion, as we have already seen, the carrying angle is 0 degree. That is, the axis of the arm and forearm must lie parallel. Now, any deviation from the normal indicates the residual uncorrected deformity. Now, 2 or 3 attempts in the same anesthesia can be made, and the elbow is immobilized in a hyperflexion, as in this particular position the tricep act as an internal splint, and the forearm is pronated, as in this particular position the medial periosteal hinge closes the cortex laterally. Now, this is in case of the posterior medial displacement. But if it is displaced posterolaterally, so that time the lateral hinge will be there. So in this particular situation, you have to keep the forearm in full supination. Now, check radiographs are taken, and all angles so far we have discussed, we must find it out whether they are restored to normalcy or not. Now, failure of which requires considering alternative methods of treatment like skeletal traction or open reduction and internal fixation. Now, modified shoulder SPACA in 3 to 4 weeks has given good results in some. Now, the traction method is indicated if the conservative treatment fails. Traction methods, it consists of either the skin traction or the skeletal traction, and now it has become of only historical importance of late due to availability of better and effective treatment methods, particularly surgery has improved. Now, the surgical treatment includes the percutaneous internal fixation or open reduction. The close reduction and percutaneous fixation, we call it as PCIF. In cases where the hyperflexion of the elbow cannot be done due to the gross swelling in and around the elbow and grossly unstable fracture is there, then percutaneous fixation of the fragment with K-wires on either side after the close reduction is an acceptable treatment form, and it is now widely used. Now, the K-wires can be inserted one from each side, or to avoid injury to the ulnar nerve medially, you can put 3 K-wires from the lateral condyle in a fanning shape. The open reduction, it is very rarely indicated in certain special situation only, particularly when there is a vascular injury, and open reduction is invariably followed by the internal fixation with either K-wire or plates in the screws, depending upon the age of a patient. Now, usually the people used to go by posterior approach, but nowadays the anterior approach to the elbow is evolved, and they see that if you approach anteriorly, then you can see the status of the brachial artery, and if required, the vascular repair can also be done very easily if we approach by the anterior way. The complications, these are broadly divided into 2 categories. Those that cause functional impairment of the extremity, that is one group, and is more serious, and 2, those that produce only cosmetic sequelae. So, complications of the functional impairment, it includes the neurological involvement. Now, overall incidence is only 7%. Radial nerve is most commonly affected and is usually injured in a posteromedial displacement. Please remember, whenever the fracture, the distal fragment is displaced, posteromedially, it is the radial nerve which gets involved. In a direct posterior displacement, it is the median nerve which gets injured. Whereas in a posterolateral displacement, it is the anterior interosseous nerve that gets injured. Ulnar nerve is injured in overhead skeletal traction and in flexion type of supracondylar fractures only. The vascular injury incidence is between 0.5 to 1%, and it is common with extension type and is usually due to the direct injury to the brachial artery by the fracture. Particularly the distal end of the proximal fragment, it injures the brachial artery. Now the other causes may be the internal thrombus, intimal tear, brachial artery going into spasm, or external compression by the proximal fracture fragment of the humerus, or fracture hematoma, partial or complete rupture of the brachial artery. These are the various causes of vascular injuries. Then there could be loss of mobility. Average loss of flexion is 4 degrees, and it is usually due to the posterior displacement which unites in that position, causing a mechanical block to the flexion. Now you can see the right elbow is completely flexing here, but there is some flexion lag on the left side because of the fracture. And myositis ossificans. It is rare and is seen in a manipulative close reduction and open reduction. When somebody has tried multiple types close reduction, and in that it results into myositis ossificans. And the cosmetic deformity includes mainly the cubitus varus or a Gunstock deformity, Gunstock elbow. Now cubitus varus or Gunstock elbow is called so because the deformity resembles a rifle gunstock. The deformity becomes obvious in extended elbow. This is the most common complication of supracondylar fractures, and the incidence varies from 9% to 58%. Now there are 3 static deformities which makes the cubitus varus deformity, and all these deformities are with respect to the distal fragment. So the distal fragment, there could be a posterior displacement, there could be a horizontal rotation, and there will be a coronal tilt. So 3 deformities make the Gunstock deformity: posterior displacement, horizontal rotation, and coronal tilt. Now the treatment is always surgical. French osteotomy is a classical treatment described. In my next video, we will discuss it in details about it. Now before we end, dear students, I want to talk to you about one more important topic: happy key to lose weight. Dear student, one of the commonest problems we are all facing in our routine clinical practice is of obesity. Eat less and exercise more formula has proved to be the failed formula for control of obesity. Of late, I have been working on latest, most scientific evidence-based concept of weight loss, happy key. Now you may find few videos on this topic as well on my YouTube channel. The obesity among the medical student is at peak nowadays. Due to obesity, not only they are bullied, but most of them also lose their self-confidence, resulting in deteriorating performance in academics. For all of them, this online video course will be of most value. If interested, you may visit my Facebook page. The link is given: https://www.facebook.com/thehappykey. And you can also visit my website www.doctorsudir.com, drsudhir.com. I host regular webinar for the same twice a week, Wednesday and Friday at 8 p.m. on Sunday at 1 p.m. You may join using following link: https://zoom.us/j/8279404308. My mission is to help more than 10 lakh persons to lose weight and get lifetime freedom from their obesity without dieting and exercises using this happy key technique. Let us all come together to create a healthy, fit India. Thank you. Thank you for subscribing my channel.